here, we're going to be looking at production diagrams. So we're going to be looking at production in the short run against production in the long run. Now, as a reminder, in the short run, at least one factor of production is fixed, and that will normally be the capital. So if firms want to increase production levels in the short run, all they can do is to add variable factors of production to the production process, and that will normally be labour. So on this first diagram, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put down variable factors of production. So think about that as labour. And then we're going to be measuring over time the marginal product. So how much extra output we get by adding extra units of variable factors of production. So that will create a marginal product curve that is shaped like this here. Now, originally, when firms increase the number of variable factors of production, they will benefit from increasing marginal returns. So these are the benefits of things such as specialisation and division of labour. And that will therefore mean additional units of labour will add more output than what previous workers were offering. Now, when we go beyond this point here, then firms are suffering from diminishing marginal returns. So the idea is that capital in the short run has now become overloaded with workers. So additional output now starts to be less as we employ more workers than what it was previously. These are linked to the problems of crowding, confusion and chaos. There is insufficient capital for workers to be using efficiently. Now, what we can then do, we can then translate this theory onto cost curve diagrams. Now, the good news is that every other diagram that you will draw linked to cost curves will have the same axes. We have costs against quantity. So on this middle diagram at the top, I'm going to be adding fixed costs, variable costs, and total costs. Now, fixed costs do not change with output. So we get this horizontal line for fixed costs. They're not dependent on how much the business produces. So in the short run, this could be things like rent on premises. It could be a lease to operate a business for that particular year. It could be the insurance costs. It could be some salaried workers that we've got to pay for in the short run. But the idea will then be if we scale up production to increase output, then we're going to create more variable costs as time goes on. So to produce a higher output, you'd have more variable costs than what you would do with a low output level. What we then do, we add together both of these two curves to get the total cost curve. And the idea is there should be a parallel gap between variable cost and total cost, because all we're doing, we're adding on the fixed cost of variable costs to get the total costs. Now, again, though, look at this. We can see here, originally, when output grows, there will not be a significant increase in total costs. And this, again, is because of the benefits of increasing marginal returns. So because we're becoming more productive in the short run, originally when we add more workers to produce more output, then we're not going to get this significant, massive increase in total costs. But then total costs will eventually start to escalate massively in the short run when we start to suffer from diminishing marginal returns. Okay, so we're becoming less efficient in the short run when the problems of crowding, confusion and chaos kick in. Right, now on the next diagram, I'm going to add 4 different curves, and then I'll show you what each of these different curves are. Right, so these are the 4 different curves. Now, the bottom one is average fixed costs. So the idea will be that average fixed cost will always fall with output because spreading that fixed cost over a bigger output as output expands. We've then got this U-shaped average variable cost, and we'll think about why this is happening in a moment or two. We add them both together, and we get the average total cost curve. This top one is the marginal cost curve. There's a few interesting points that we need to note from this diagram in the short run. When we have a reduction in marginal costs, again, we're benefiting from increasing marginal returns. So because we're becoming more productive in the short run because of specialisation and division of labour, using capital more efficiently, as we produce extra units of output, marginal costs will keep on falling. But then we will eventually suffer from diminishing marginal returns. So that will see the marginal costs start to increase. Now, another really, really important point on this diagram, though, is this green point here. Now, I'm going to label that Q star, C star. Now, that point there shows productive efficiency. That is where the firm is working at lowest average costs. That will always occur on a diagram when MC is equal to average total cost of production. Now, the mathematics behind it are fairly straightforward. Before that point there, the marginal cost is below the average total costs. So additional units of output are creating less costs than what the average is. It sucks the average down. But then when we go beyond that point, marginal costs are now higher than average total costs. So additional units of output are creating more costs than what the average is, and it will suck the average back up again. Okay, now what you could argue is that when the firm starts to see average total cost of production starting to grow, then ultimately, in the short run, the capital is now insufficient to sustain further growth in the business efficiently. So what firms will do in the long run is to now scale up all factors of production. So in the long run, everyone, all factors of production will become variable. Right, so the next diagram that I'm going to draw is a diagram that we call the envelope curve. And this shows the relationship between short run and long run production. Now I'm just going to label the axes on these three different diagrams. So because we're measuring costs against quantity, it's the same axes. In fact, let's do all six. It's going to be the same for all of these. Okay. Right, now the idea is now, look at that marginal cost curve, look at that average total cost curve, that's short run. I'm going to take those curves from that diagram and plonk them on to a much bigger diagram. I've got marginal cost 1, and I've now got short run average total cost 1 as well. Now the idea is that I'm still in the short run got the increasing and diminishing marginal returns, but they're a short run concept. Now when firms scale up production, they can move on to brand new cost curves. So when firms grow and expand, they may move on to this new short run average total cost curve. But again, what they would experience will be increasing marginal returns in the short run, and then diminishing marginal returns in the short run. And then what we do, we can add another one. Now, hopefully, what you can see is the trend here is that the average total cost of production is starting to fall. We'll think about why this is happening in a moment or two. But then strange things can happen. When firms become too big, they may find that scaling up production even further may see average total cost move upwards, so they're moving in the wrong direction now. Now all I now do, I take the gradients of these different short run average total cost curves to give us the shape of production in the long run, so long run average total costs. Okay, so we call this diagram the envelope curve. Now all I've got to do on the next diagram is just to show you the long run average total cost curve without all of those short run average total costs. Now again, what we can do on this diagram, we can show some really, really important points. Q star, C star, again, is productive efficiency. It's where the firm is working at lowest average total cost. But the idea is that when firms grow in the long run, so scaling up all of their factors of production, they will originally benefit from internal economies of scale. So this could be things such as financial, risk-bearing, marketing, managerial, technical, purchasing, linked to monopoly power, etc. So these are the cost advantages of scaling up production. But then when we go beyond the productive efficient output point at C star, Q star, we start to suffer from internal diseconomies of scale. So this is where scaling up production too much in the long run will lead to an increase in long run average total costs. And these are linked to problems such as poor communication, coordination, poor staff motivation, but also something called the principal agent problem as well. Now, the next diagram to the right of this is a differentiate long run average total cost curve. Now, this one looks a little bit like the bottom of the bucket. So look what we've got now. This firm now is achieving lowest average total cost, so productive efficiency, over a range of output points. Now, in many ways, this is a lot more realistic than the previous diagram, because what we're now suggesting is, well, actually, can we really say there's only one output point where firms operate at lowest long run average total costs? In reality, there'll be a range of output points where they achieve productive efficiency. Now, apart from that, this diagram can be analysed in the same way as the previous one. Originally, firms will benefit from internal economies of scale, and then they will suffer from internal diseconomies of scale. Now, what we can also add to this diagram, though, as well, is this. We call that point there the minimum efficient scale. This is the lowest output the firm must get to operate at lowest long-run average total cost. So if they don't get to Q1, they're too small, for example, they will have not fully benefited from their internal economies of scale. Now, on this diagram, then we can also say that this point here is the maximum efficient scale. If the firm goes beyond that output level there, then long-run average total cost of production will start to move in the wrong direction. Right, last three diagrams, everyone. Now, the next one is something that we call a natural monopoly. Now, hopefully what you notice is that this long-run average total cost curve now looks very similar to the average fixed cost curve in the top right-hand corner diagram. Let me explain why. Some big businesses will have huge fixed costs, so huge setup costs. And once those costs have been paid for, they have very few additional costs. So the idea is that firms that have got very, very few marginal costs, when they scale up production, they will only ever see their long-run average cost of production falling. So look at this. This firm, as they become bigger, will only ever benefit from internal economies of scale. Now, this is one of the few examples where we would argue a monopoly, so a market dominated by one firm, is a good thing. So this firm grows bigger and bigger and bigger and has more and more customers, then long-run average total cost will always go down with output. That should lead to lower prices for you as consumers. This firm also will never suffer or never benefit from productive efficiency. They're never going to operate at lowest long-run average total costs. More customers will only ever see the average cost of production fall. They will also never suffer from internal diseconomies of scale, though. So there are some benefits to it in that way as well. Right, last two. I'm going to start off with the same diagram for both of them. So I'm just going to kick off by drawing these long-run average total cost curves. What I'll then do, I'll label the productive efficiency point, where the firm operates at lowest long-run average total cost. Right, so I've done that in both of these different diagrams here. Now, what I want to show are the impacts of external economies of scale and external diseconomies of scale. I'll show you the diagram and I'll give you some ideas behind this in a moment or two. And when we benefit from external economies of scale, the LRATC curve will move down. So long-run average total cost of production will fall. When we suffer from external diseconomies of scale, LRATC will move upwards. And as it moves upwards, we can see that long run average total cost of production have now started to increase. Right, now the idea behind this then now is, with internal economies of scale and diseconomies of scale, we were looking at the firm growing. In these last two diagrams, the firm hasn't grown. If we assume they were operating at the productive efficient output point of Q1, then their long run average total cost of production have changed without them changing the size of the business. Now, what has caused this is things that are happening inside their industry. So not within their individual firm, but things that are happening within their industry. So if you think about this first one, external economies of scale, when an industry grows, the firms that operate in that market will benefit from some of the improvements in that industry. So it could be, as the industry grows and becomes more important, governments might pass more favourable legislation that will help them reduce their costs. Transport that benefits these firms might be improved, which helps them reduce their average costs of production. There might be a growth in people with the right skills to work in these industries, which will help them reduce their average cost of production. Now, the one in the bottom right, I sort of think about this one as an industry becoming a victim of its own success. As an industry grows, the firms in the industry are competing harder to get hold of the resources they need. This could be workers, but it could also be land resources. So as these resources start to become more scarce, it will bid up their costs. So it means these firms will have higher costs of production on the back of this, and that will therefore raise their long-run average total costs. So guys, what you've got there on the screen are the 9 really, really important diagrams that you need for production costs.